This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Welcome back to the fourth draft. I'm Erin Trafford, and here's the thing. I'm going right there, right away. I typically like talking about solutions, but today we're going to frame this episode around a problem. And in particular, a question of, do you have a revenue problem or do you have a content problem? And therein we will talk about solutions. But that's really the framework for what I want to talk with you about today on this particular episode, because inevitably, regardless of the level that you operate at or how you are using content, media, and storytelling, you will come up against this friction point. And revenue can look a whole bunch of different ways. So we're going to speak in somewhat generalities, as we often do on this show. But this is just to get you thinking and considering. If you hit a friction point, meaning something is not feeling like it's working, or the data is plainly telling you that things are not working, how do you evaluate? Because it's always one or the other. It's rarely both. No, it's rarely both. One is always the seed. Either you're having a fundamental problem creating an outcome, which is what we're going to say is revenue, is sales, because 90% of the time, that's what you're actually looking for. Is it a revenue problem, or is it a media content story problem? Is it a resonance problem? Now, these things are clearly deeply connected. I like to think of them, if you're a visual person, which I am not, so I'm going to do my best here. Think of them like an infinity symbol, right? Where there really is no beginning, there really is no end, and the two completely coincide right in the middle. So there's always this very deep connection between what you're putting out there and the resonance it's generating and the input you are getting back. Are you meeting your objectives? Is what you're putting out into the world creating the desired result? They're so inextricably linked, but we're going to try to separate them down today in this episode, particularly to talk about sales and content marketing. We do a lot of top of funnel work at Story Studio Network. That is where branded podcasts are your absolute surefire best tool in your kit right now. If you have a plan to take your brand to a new place in the next 24 to 36 months, start a branded podcast now that is properly aligned, and your resonance is going to just start to pick up over time. What you're putting out eventually is going to bring the right kind of inputs back in. But what happens if you just hit this crunchy point and it's like hitting a brick wall? And you don't have that kind of time to fix it. You need some quick and dirty tips and ways to get in and to evaluate. So let's talk about that today. We're going to look at how to diagnose if it's a content problem. We're going to look at how to diagnose if it's a revenue problem. And it may not actually be the pathway to a diagnosis that you think it is. And then I'm going to give you some really quick and strategic things that you can do basically immediately. So not with a 2-3 year timeline, like with a 2 week to 2 month timeline, to start to turn that ship around. Okay. So today is going to be very tactical, very strategic. And if you want to take notes, great. And as always, if you have questions coming out of this, you can drop them into the comment box wherever you're seeing this episode, if it's on LinkedIn, if it's on Spreaker, or you can fire me off an email. All of those details are in the show notes. By the way, I'm Erin Trafford, media strategist and CEO at Story Studio Network, where we produce best-in-class branded podcasts for some of the largest and biggest organizations in Canada. And we've been doing this, we're OGs. I'm an OG in the content space. I've been in media since my late teens, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but that's more than 2 decades. And I have been in the digital content space since 2008. So you can do the math on that one. I have bought and sold digital properties. I have built influencer marketing agencies. I have a deep wealth of knowledge in the old school broadcast media, behemoth style corporate engine. I also have an extreme amount of experience in the pull up your bootstraps and do it yourself scrappy digital marketing world. I bring all of that together to the work that I do now, leading the charge as CEO at Story Studio Network, because I went all in on branded podcasts primarily because I actually asked myself this very question that I've asked you today in this episode. Is the world having a content crisis, or do we really have a sales problem? And that was sort of a conversation that started to come up when I was speaking with a lot of broadcasters in radio, right? There was a huge narrative a year ago. Radio is dead. Radio is dying. And, you know, we can get into why there are certain very real challenges in the Canadian communications and broadcast world. But it's not because the content is bad. It's actually, and if you ask the folks who are surviving this tumult, they'll say it's actually a sales challenge. So that's what brought me to today's episode. We need to talk about this because if this is happening at large scale in Canadian broadcasting, if this is happening at large scale with large digital organizations, then it's probably happening to you on a much smaller scale. But here's the thing, the solutions to these problems can scale up or scale down. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's talk about how do we diagnose if we have a content problem? And I'm going to preface this by saying I absolutely abhor using the word content. As someone who truly feels vocationally aligned with being a storyteller, with someone who has positioned her entire life and career around resonance, around legacy, around emotion, around the humanity of stories and the necessity of stories, using a term as calculated and sanitary as content hurts my body. It hurts my soul. But I am going to use that term today because, frankly, it's just easier. But please know that when I say content, I don't mean checking boxes, filling up text boxes and a content calendar and all of those really static hard edge things, okay? I mean, you're the story you are telling, the resonance you create. Hear that in my voice. However, I'm going to use the word content. Otherwise, we will be here all day. Okay, so how do we diagnose a content problem? Now, there are some really, really top line things that will be happening if you have a content problem. First one will be crickets. Now, crickets don't always mean crickets. Okay, you're like, Erin, what? Are there any rules in this world? No, there's no rules. There's no rules. Crickets will happen and it'll be slow. Okay, and that means nobody's responding to you. Your engagement rates are dropping. All of those wonderful top line metrics will start to drop off. So if you have a podcast, that might actually mean you're losing downloads or subscribers, or the habits of those downloads and subscribers are changing slowly over time. And they aren't being replaced with other also highly valuable habits and downloads and behaviors. Okay. So you will start to see this. I would suggest that if you believe that you have an engagement problem of that sort, look at 3 months worth of historic data to come to that conclusion. Don't just look at the last week or 2 weeks or even the last month. Okay. Look at it contextually and really, really evaluate it and try to be objective about it. Now, if you do look at it and you're like, okay, wait a minute, quarter over quarter, we have seen a significant drop in engagement of this sort, then ask the next question. Don't just say, oh, engagement's down. Therefore, human nature is to create more content to boost that number. Well, if my engagement dropped 10%, I need to create 10% more content, not the solution. Okay. This is a data point. That's it. That's all you're doing. Did my engagement drop or did it rise? If it rose, put a pin in it, because then you might have a sales problem, and we'll get to that in a minute. But if it did drop, okay, this is a data point. It dropped. This type of engagement dropped. Did anything replace it? Were you getting longer, more involved email responses? Did you actually book more calls? Were you invited to more backroom conversations? Did you land that coalition or partnership that your organization had been working on for the last year? Because if any and all of those, for example, things also happened alongside that drop in engagement, that drop in engagement may actually be indicative of growth in your messaging and resonance. It may actually be a positive. It may mean you don't have to reevaluate your plan. It may mean it's time to move to step 2 and start talking about something different. Okay, so a drop in engagement is not always a negative, and it drives me crazy when, you see these gurus, especially on LinkedIn, because that's where I spend the majority of my social media time, actually 100% of it now. And it's like, oh, your engagement is down. Your engagement is down. This is bad. It's not always bad. It's just information. It means that the content that you're putting out is not really the content that's needed anymore. That's it. Take the emotion out. It's not a judgment on you. Okay? So that's what to do with engagement. That's how you're going to actually diagnose it. The next thing that may be happening is if you look at your engagement and it's dropped, and you also have not seen a replacement behavior, as in you have not seen that additional conversion, you're not also getting those email responses, you're not actually booking the calls, the partnerships are not coming together, you're not being put into the rooms that you want to be in. Okay, so then you're starting to see that you're having a conversion problem. Then you need to take it to the next level, and let's really evaluate, do we need to back things up to create that conversion before moving to phase 2? You'll notice I'm talking about this in phases. This is how we are looking at your media plan, is in phases. We're going to use phase 1 to establish those ground rules of engagement and to push the needle on that core objective. Is it to get into the rooms? Is it to get more email responses? Is it to book more calls? Because when you book more calls, you book more sales. Once that starts happening, move to phase 2 on your media messaging, which is where fait accompli, you can start to talk about things and position your story in a different way because you have results that you can build on. Okay. This is how I build media plans with clients. It's always an action with a foundational objective underneath it. Once that first foundational objective is met, you change the action to meet the next objective. Okay. It's always in tandem. Like I said, remember, this is an infinity symbol. You cannot separate them, but you can be on a high on one and on a low on another. All right, so let's say you are having trouble meeting that core conversion. What do we do now? Well, now we look at, are you having a sales problem? Which really is a way to say, is there a lack of alignment with what you are putting out into the world and what the world wants from you? Okay, so I want to draw this distinction. If you have a content problem, it's going to feel like you're shouting into the void and nobody is listening. Versus if you have a revenue problem, it's going to mean like you're putting lots of stuff out there and you are getting some response, but the response you're getting does not feel like the right response. You are getting invited to go to things that do not align. You're booking sales calls with unqualified prospects. You are not actually achieving the fait accompli that you set out to complete within that first phase. Something else is happening and it doesn't feel good. It's taking you in a direction that you didn't intend to go. All right. So that's how you energetically distinguish between this is a content problem and this is a sales problem. One feels like screaming and no one can hear you. The other one feels like screaming and all the wrong responses being hurled back at you. Okay. So if that's what's going on, let's look at that. What does it look like if you have an input problem? If your revenue is not matching, if your conversions are not matching, this is going to look like you have pretty strong engagement. Maybe you have lots of donations. Maybe you have lots of emails in your inbox. Maybe you have lots of people soliciting your advice in your DMs, whatever that looks like. But for whatever reason, none of that is converting to the actual outcome you want. They're low-end clients. They don't respect your time. It's not the kind of partnerships you want. They're fundamentally misunderstanding what you do. And I'll give you a perfect example from my own life. When we first launched Story Studio Network, I cannot tell you the number of times I had to tell a client that I am not a social media manager. It hurt me. It frustrated me. They'd come and they'd say, well, can't you just slice and dice my show? Can't I just send you my audio file and you can make me look amazing? And I'd say, no, that is not what I do. I am an executive producer with highly skilled, highly trained team that will craft your narrative with you. We will be strategic partners with you. We will integrate with your team. We are going to create a content asset for you, a storytelling asset for you, tantamount to a documentary about this particular thing that you're really passionate about and is part of your overall mission of your organization. I am not going to slice and dice your Zoom call for you and tell you how to post it on Instagram and TikTok. Are you out of your mind? Now, when I found myself saying that, I realized, oh, wait a minute. I don't have a content problem. They're responding to my content. I had a sales problem. I had a positioning problem. And you'll notice, if you've been paying attention, I don't know if you have, over the last year, I worked really hard to back that up. So I started getting the right inputs. So now, when I meet with clients, they're not asking me about TikTok. They're asking me about paid distribution. They're asking me about brand equity. They're asking me about how to do asynchronous production so that we can get more thought leadership into their limited series content. They're asking about top of funnel building awareness and brand lift. They're asking about all the things that I wanted them to ask about, but it's because I did this exact audit. When I started getting the wrong result from my content, I had to reevaluate. So it's that misalignment between the content and your offer. And that will, sometimes it'll feel like you're being hit in the face with a frozen wet mackerel because that's how it felt for me. All right. It'll be a struggle. This one feels worse. So the root cause is, and I'm going to use revenue as the word, just like content. It's not always revenue, but that kind of challenge and friction stems from this lack of alignment between what you are saying and what your audience is hearing you say. But I will challenge you to understand what I have come to know is that solving that problem is actually an act of listening. Revenue issues aren't actually about a lack of sales. They're about a lack of your ability to respond to the audience in the right time, in the right way. It's a lack of alignment between your content and your audience's needs in that moment. So here's how to fix it. Here's how to fix it all. If you are sitting there and you're like, okay, wait a minute, we're just having an engagement problem, but it's actually not an engagement problem. So maybe we're ready to talk about something else, or we're having an engagement problem and a conversion problem, or our engagement is high, but our conversions are the worst. Here are some practical things that you can do. This is where to start. If any or all of those three scenarios is you, I want you to audit your content. Like I just said, you can look at your last 10 pieces. I would look at that because that's often indicative of where your headspace is in the short term and where you have been focusing your energy. For example, I found for a while when there was a lot of stuff going on in Canadian media, my content was really reflective of my own personal anger and frustration with that. And it confused my audience because I wasn't talking about my wins, my solutions. I wasn't talking enough about how I can help them navigate that scenario. I was so caught up in my own anger and my own experience of that's all I was talking about. So, and I'm being totally transparent with you. There was about 3 weeks worth of time when that's all I posted about. And yeah, that's going to create a lack of conversion because I was creating the wrong resonance. I wasn't meeting my audience where they were at. So I had great engagement. Some of those posts went viral. Wrong conversion. Okay. So look at the last pieces, the last, 2 weeks worth of content and say, okay, wait a minute. Did we get distracted by something? Were we posting in the moment? Were we not following the plan? Did we get diverted? Maybe we didn't post anything. Okay. Is it clear? Is it consistent? And are you at least creating some sort of actionable call to action? But then also look at the last 3 months. And if you've got enough, look at quarter over quarter. So the last 3 months compared to the previous 3 months. Where is the engagement shifting? And is engagement behavior being replaced? If it's being replaced, you're ready to go deeper with your audience. If it's not, you need to fix the resonance and the alignment. So the next step is, once you've determined that, look at what stories are you telling and what sale or what activation are you looking to create? Because here's a problem, and this is kind of a habit that I see a lot of folks fall into, is they'll be really great storytellers, whether it's on their podcast or on their LinkedIn or with their newsletter. But then they'll be either one of two things. They'll write, for example, there'll be an excellent piece, storytelling piece, thought leadership, provocative, whatever form that comes in. And then the next piece is exceptionally rigid and sales oriented. And it's almost like they're showing two distinct parts of themselves that they don't want to mesh. Evaluate the tone of your content because you're going to hit that sweet spot when you're able to mesh without any kind of bump or friction, your marketing and your storytelling. How can your story be so compelling and so well told that it creates the action in your audience almost without you having to ask for it? Are you being too bifurcated in your approach? And then I would also just challenge your team, if you've got a team or you've got someone else helping you with it, to try to make sure that you're not doing too much of this kind of lifestyle post, lifestyle content without any call to action. Okay. So really, really evaluate where here did I miss the opportunity to offer a call to action and where here was I completely not telling a story at all. The last step is to listen. Like I said, creating story and creating sales, they're two sides of the same coin. They're two parts of the same infinity symbol. Both require showing up. Both require knowing what you want to say. Both require energetically tapping into your core values and your core mission and sharing it in the most authentic and truthful way possible. However, both also require a keen commitment to listening. I've used the word resonance quite a bit in this episode. If you are not listening to your audience, you're going to miss opportunities to tell great stories, and you're 100% going to miss opportunities to turn those stories into conversion events. When you align your audience's needs and what they're saying, when you create a call and response between what you're putting out in the world and what the world is giving back to you, you will see results. So just like I said, when I started having that problem where I was getting the wrong kind of response to my content, one of the first things I did was tell a story about that. See how I'm threading this needle? And I just told you the story. And now you're seeing, oh, wait a minute. She's self-aware. You've learned more about me. Maybe you trust me more. You can do that too. Now, is it harder if you're running a corporate organization? Absolutely it is. So there are other ways of listening. You can do surveys. You can do focus groups. You can ask for testimonials. You can dig deep into your archival content or results or strategic reports and create a story of where you started and where you are now. What's changed? What's changed in your leadership style? Why has it changed? What's changed in your focus and your positioning? Why has it changed? Because our donors told us this. Because the world suggested that this was more important. Because we're hearing this from folks who are, wanting to support us, but haven't been able to. Be transparent. Listen and reflect. So step 1, I'm just going to run through those one more time. Audit the content. Last 10 days, did you fall in a pit? Last 3 months, what does it look like in comparison to the previous 3 months? Okay. Next step is align the marketing and the sales and make sure that you're not just doing great storytelling on one side and then hardcore marketing on the other. Find ways to bring those two streams closer together so that you're not running in two different energetic directions. Step 3 is focus on your audience and making sure that you're creating a feedback loop. You're creating that resonance at some point in your strategy. What you're putting out into the world with your content and your storytelling needs to be part of an acknowledgement that you're listening. Doing that is going to strengthen your ability to convert content into conversion. Okay. So we started off this episode by asking a question: do you have a content problem or do you have a revenue problem? And I think what we've really come to tease out here over the last few minutes is that content problems show up as low engagement. They show up as weak storytelling. Revenue problems and conversions problems show up as energetic misalignment. They often feel like frustration. Both are connected. The solution to both is to think about what your audience needs and expects from you and to respond to that. So your homework is clear. Run through those 3 steps: 10 days, 3 months, marketing versus storytelling, and how much are you listening and how much are you reflecting? As a person, as an entrepreneur, as an organization, whatever that is. And if you're struggling to diagnose any of this, let's book a chat. My call booking link is in the show notes because I can run you through this. And I guarantee you, we're going to find friction points and we're going to find ways through it. I'd love to help you with that. All right. In the next episode, I got another big question for you. We're rounding out this season with some big questions. And I'm going to be asking you to get really, really honest with, does your brand actually stand for anything? We're going to go there. We're going to go there. All right. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Erin Trafford. This is The Fourth Draft. We'll see you in the next episode.
SSN.
We know podcasts.
Find us at storystudionetwork.com.